Hello, listeners, and welcome to the third and final part of this mini-series with author Anke Richter discussing her book Cult Trip. To find out more about Anke's writing and work, you can follow the links in the episode description. But for now, here is Anke. As you've mentioned, there's various different factions and chapters of the falling out of the Rajneesh movement, with individuals being accused of being close followers of Rajneesh and now operating human trafficking circles and being responsible for the sexual exploitation of women, moving them to different countries. We've had individuals come and do interviews on the podcast where they've spoken about being victims of individuals that practiced under Rajneesh, took so many of the tactics and methods used by Rajneesh during the peak of the Rajneesh movement and now apply it to their own circles of manipulation and coercion. And so even though this clinical ashram exists where people can go and there aren't really that many outward signs that those abuses took place and that those environments existed, it is still felt around the world. And it's like an insidious thing that just grows under the surface of marble floors and people denying that bad things ever happened.
And what I've always felt over the years, and it's maybe it has been difficult for me to identify where it comes from, but I think it is partly maybe human potential movement stuff, and it's also the Osho or the Bhagwan movement philosophy, whatever you want to call it. It's this whole notion of it's always your stuff, the lack of empathy, the lack of ownership. There is always an expectation that if you suffer, if you're not happy, if something happened to you, it's only for you and only for you to sort out, not for the person who you're in conflict with. So I've seen this as center point, and I've felt this always very much also with sannyasins I met across the world, especially in Germany back then, who had, they didn't have a charitable bone in their body. They were finding themselves in India and traveling wherever they're in the world, but they did not believe in doing any charitable work, or they were definitely not social justice warriors. And at the time I was much more a social justice person than a spiritual person. So that always baffled me, that they're all after their enlightenment and whatnot, but they had this fatalistic, is that even the right word, but this view of, well, these people, who are suffering, we can't help them anyway. We're not here to, I've heard this again and again. Also at my week when I was there at the meditation resort, where they said, well, we're not here to rescue them. We're not here to change, how screwed up the Indian society is or whatever, we're not here to rescue them. Like that's their work to do. We do our work, we do theirs. And I mean, to some degree, I get what they mean. On the other hand, I think there's such a coldness and such a lack of empathy in it. And I see this, it's rife in the New Age world. It's all about, I got mineism. If this works for me, then it's great. And if it doesn't work for you and you've had a bad experience, well, then sorry, but it's not for me to judge what happened. Yeah, I think it's actually part of the wider problem that I now feel very passionate about, namely, calling out sexual abuse in these New Age and Tantra spaces. And I think it's these kind of, this kind of thinking. And I mean, I don't know exactly where we can, pinpoint it to where it comes from, but it's definitely been perpetuated a lot through the whole sannyasin world. Yeah, and we see what the kind of spiritual bypassing and denial and gaslighting it creates now.
And that was still a present factor in the next part where you find yourself in Thailand. So again, if you would please, Anke, just talk the listeners through the kind of the third or the third quarter of the
middle
of
part.
the book.
The middle part. Yeah. It's called Toxic Tantra. And after visiting the Osho ashram, again, it kind of fell into my lap because I was already following a cult journalist who you might probably know, B. Schofield in the United States, bit of a gonzo journalist who really goes, a cult buster and a journalist. I have a lot of respect for her. And she published a report that had fallen into her hands, or that people had handed to her, 31 women of a yoga school in Thailand, which I'd never heard about until then, had complained about or had reported about their sexual abuse. It's actually not quite true. I did hear, I only put the dots together later, but I did come across someone, quite a sort of cocky Tantra teacher guy. I actually did a session with him once, and he said, oh yeah, he said to me, oh, I lived in a Tantra community in Thailand for 3 years and it was amazing. And it's always stuck with me. I thought, oh, Tantric community in Thailand. Well, that sounds fascinating. And then only later I put the dots together and thought, oh, he was actually an Agama. So Agama is this, and it's actually still going in Koh Phangan, little hippie island, or Vice recently called it Tantra Island in Thailand. Beautiful, beautiful place. And Agama absolutely dominated the Tantra and yoga scene there. So it called itself a yoga university, but also a tantric school. And the backdrop to Agama, and this is fascinating and also absolutely disturbing, is an esoteric yoga school from Romania called Misa. And they have a guru who's actually one of the most on the wanted list from Interpol, and they have a shocking track record of sex trafficking, of alleged sex trafficking, pushing women into porn and pole dancing and sex work to become quote unquote goddesses, with a lot of quote unquote karma yoga. Absolutely insidious, horrific organization that is still going under the umbrella of the Atman Federation, Tara Yoga in the UK, for instance, right? So you wouldn't make the connection straight away because it's just a yoga school, or Nata Yoga in Scandinavia. And Agama, their guru, or Swami as he calls himself, is actually Narcis Takao from Romania, who left Misa at some point and then started his own outfit there. And probably chose wisely to go to Thailand because the statute of limitation for rape at the time was only 3 months. And it's very possible that he's been bribing the authorities so he could run things his way on the island. And they were definitely one of the biggest players there on Koh Phangan, and they have a lot of yoga schools there. So in 2018, these reports were published because students within Agama had, like in so many cults, had again and again over the years tried to change the system from within, to bring, allegations to the head of the school, to create change. They didn't want to burn the whole palace down, but they wanted enough of a revolution. They wanted enough of a revolution so that things would change. And it never happened because they had this megalomaniac as a leader. So when everything blew up and B. Schofield published a report, he flew up from the island and was gone for 3 months. In that time, I flew there, and together with the Guardian, it was me and the Guardian, and they didn't go there, but they reported about it. We basically blew this out of the water for the mainstream media, me for Germany and New Zealand, and the Guardian obviously for the UK and the rest of the world. And it was a massive Me Too scandal that rocked the yoga and Tantra world. There had been reports before, but they were never really in big media outlets. It was more like B. Schofield or websites or Facebook groups like Tantra Not Trauma. And also because this was a yoga school, so it wasn't just a neo tantra outfit. They had a hardcore training. People went there, did their yoga training there. This was their professional education that they did. Yeah, and to then maybe become a yoga teacher somewhere else when they go back. Most of the students were all from around the world, international students, the States, the UK, Australia, some Kiwis, from some New Zealanders who I've interviewed, and so much coercion, so much sort of pickup artistry, almost pushing men into becoming these dominant figures, women who have to surrender to really then, where do I even begin? I could go and, I could do a whole rant about the misogynistic stereotypes in this kind of Tantra that's maybe even culturally appropriated from its origins. And it basically led to rape. yeah, to women being raped in these yoni massages, or going for a meditation, being invited for meditation in the guru's home always meant that he's going to have sex with you. And women were supposed to be grateful for that because he was, sharing his magic cup with them and healing them. And it was just so, it's just terrible what happened there. And at the same time, even though there were no children involved, but people had invested a lot. They couldn't just leave. Maybe their passports weren't locked up in a safe, but they didn't have a work visa. And if they would go into the police and complain, they would actually run into trouble for having worked at the school, or they had built their whole existence there, becoming yoga teachers themselves and running courses. So again, their lives, their identities, their friendships, the whole community was tied to Agama, and then everything fell over. So that was a massive scandal. And I went there, and it gave me so much more insight also into how these things play out in a bit of a different environment, but also the similarities, and then also the closeness to the group that I was involved with at the time, namely ISTA, International School of Temple Arts. And after I came back from my Agama research, I had a stopover in England where I did my very last training ever with ISTA. I was actually an assistant, and I went to the two lead teachers, two women who I really liked and respected at the time, and I said, hey, hey, can I just, I'm like the harbinger here. I have something to tell you. I've just been investigating Agama yoga, and I think you need to be aware of how, ISTA is going to be the same. You're going to end up in the same way as an abusive sex cult if you don't change a few things here. And they were not interested in hearing more from me. They're basically, that's not what I was. That was not my role. I was there to fill the water bottles and make sure, people that I was leading in the morning would all, no one would quit. Actually, one woman did quit, so I probably didn't do a good enough job as an assistant. But that was my personal turning point as well. I thought, I can't really support this whole world anymore. They don't see their own, blind spots and shadows, and there's too much arrogance, and they're a few degrees better than Agama, but they have it's basically the same problems, even if it's not, it wasn't rape at that stage, but there were definitely transgressions. And now we also know that there has been rape. And I just published a story in Germany with the exclusive news that a rabbi from ISTA has actually had a rape complaint filed with him against him in Israel. So, it's all very intertwined. What I was personally still exploring at the time, and the research I was doing was getting very close. And I definitely now then had skin in the game, because this wasn't just a historic sex cult, but a school that's going. And I actually know and knew people from ISTA who had been through Agama. So it's very close to home in some ways.
Feels very urgent as well. It's like, okay, the leader's gone, we need to get in, we're going to collect these stories, we know there's an expose, and then we're going to break everything wide open before he gets back.
Well, no, the sad news is that all these media stories didn't lead to Agama actually closing down. They could get away with it. They just rebranded for a little bit. They sent out a newsletter where they're basically blaming the victims and pretending these are all lies, and they got away with it because people either forget, or they don't Google, or they just want to have their amazing weekend Kopangan with a yoga school where maybe the first class is free, and they get hooked in, and they don't. This the cognitive, honestly, it just baffles me that after everything we now know about Agama, after media reports in I think over 50 countries, 2 or 3 documentaries where they were exposed and named and shamed, people still go there. I mean, it's a much smaller school now. Things have definitely changed, but I think during COVID, apparently, I haven't been there since, but some of my sources, they told me things have really ramped up again because they did so much online training. And they've never had a proper, then you go on their website, you don't even read anything like a PR statement that says something about, well, we made some mistakes in 2018 and we're sorry, blah, blah, nothing, as if it's never happened. Unbelievable.
I feel like that's almost a pattern with a lot of tantric yoga groups that are led by swamis, that masses and masses of allegations come out, lawsuits take place, people are sued, people serve jail time, and yet these places never stop existing. Yogaville, 3HO, Kundalini Yoga, Agami. I mean, the ashram in India that people go and visit because of the, air quotes, good old days. And Mary Garden talked about going to visit a very isolated ashram, a tiny little place near the rainforest, where she stayed and was horrifically treated. And
Yes.
this
Yeah.
place still exists, and this man is still doing what he was doing years before, and it's always the same playbook. It's always the same. I'm a celibate enlightened leader. We're not having sex. I'm just raising your kundalini levels. um and you're the only person that I do this with, as well as all the other girls that are here, and so on and so forth. And now we are understanding that Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was not excluded from those same tactics as well. He and even kind of even more nefarious was saying that the only way he is enlightened is because he draws from female energy. So he needs to keep himself surrounded by women to remain enlightened, so that he can pass this special enlightenment down onto other people. So basically, like, if the women don't stay close to me, I'm not enlightened, and therefore you never will be either. Like, there's such a twisted and dark thing. But
Yeah.
you've, at this point, researched and investigated Centerpoint, which was heavily, which as separate as an intentional community, was heavily focused on radical sex and psychedelic drug taking,
Yeah.
and therapy. And
Yeah.
then we're talking about Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, which is a whole other thing on its own, but kind of still links to yogic practices,
And
um,
Tantra.
and,
Yeah.
and Tantra. And then you're spending time on a remote island in Thailand, but that is different because it's still ongoing, and the leader is active and present. And the last part of the book is about Christian fundamentalism, which is very different from these first three things, and is back in New Zealand. So you've kind of gone full circle at this point, but to just a different part of the country of New Zealand, and is still, like the small island in Thailand, a very much present and ongoing and existing community. So I wondered if you could just talk the listener, because we've never covered Gloria Vale on the podcast. So for anyone listening that isn't sure, can you please explain to the listeners, what is Gloria Vale?
Oh, and please do an episode just about Gloria Vale. I'd love to put you in touch with some good people, because it's a big topic in New Zealand. It has been for a while. I mean, they've been here since they've existed for decades. I mean, wow, almost. Gosh, when did they start? Around the same time as Centerpoint, actually. In fact, the charismatic leader of Gloriaville and the charismatic leader of Centerpoint, they saw each other as rivals to some degree. So founded by a traveling preacher from Australia, fundamentalist Christians wanted to, live without possessions, like, in the early Bible sort of. Look, I'm not super firm in the whole Christian ideology around it, but it's fundamentalist, share all possessions, everyone is dressed the same, so they didn't get into these uniforms, the blue uniforms, straight away, but they have been for a long time, since they moved onto this compound called Gloriaville that's in the bush in the west coast New Zealand, quite remote even for New Zealand standards. And New Zealand has been fascinated with them because we had a glossy TV program in 2016, 17. And so New Zealanders have a bit of a weird obsession with Gloriavale. And whenever they hear that I've actually gone in there twice, they go, oh, tell me about Gloriavale. So they see this as this fascinating sort of sugar-coated freak show in some ways. They do not, or they haven't until recently, I think, really understood that it's actually a gulag with massive human rights violations, yeah, and especially a subjugation of women. So big families, but if you think of some Mormon cults, lots and lots of children, no birth control, you marry as soon as you can, you're being married off, you have no choice in who you get married to. Everyone, all the families with their kids sleep in one room, no privacy. And similar to Centrepoint, even though it's not promiscuity is the dogma, but it's also very much a dogma around being sexually available as a wife for your husband. It's actually in their scriptures. It's actually in their little booklet, what we believe. It's right there from the get-go. And like you said, even though this was, yeah, you're right. This was almost like I wouldn't say an outlier for me, but it was at first just a purely journalistic project. When I went there for the first time, I was actually sent there by various media outlets. I did a big investigation for New Zealand Geographic, where I met lots of people who've left and sort of traced back their recovery and how they've been. But I also once went for another media outlet and sat through their excruciatingly long and fascinating and somehow disturbing Disney-like concert, which they put on every 2 years for free to keep their charitable status. And I wrote a sort of scathing review about it, or just to say, hey, this is not a freak show. People are actually suffering in here. What are we doing going to their concerts and pretending it's just all fun? Yeah. Bread and circus. So I had, I've written stories about them, but it only actually got really under my skin at my last round when I was wrapping, Gloriavale up for my book and was updating a few interviews, and then met an amazing woman. Her name is Virginia Courage, who had only come out 2 years earlier. She'd been born in Centrepoint. And she and her husband and children all came out, and it's almost like it was going down the rabbit hole into Gilead, the Handmaid's Tale. That's what it felt like. Which always, when I watched The Handmaid's Tale, Gloriavale's always come to my mind, the similarities of the women being breeding machines, being basically so much under the control, not just of their husbands so much, but of the leaders and shepherds, who are basically like the parents or the husbands above the husbands, who have ultimate control. Just the brutality, the subjugation, also of the men, so much trauma. The children, who are also very sexualized, because it's so much sort of in their face. A lot of boys on boys, teenage abuse, like where older boys force younger boys, and then they later become perpetrators as well. So it's like a massive incest family in lots of ways. And shockingly, these issues have stayed under the radar for so long. I mean, you'd think with Centrepoint in New Zealand, which is actually, even on the global scale, given we're just a little peaceful little country at the bottom of the world, not really renowned for our crazy sex cults, right? Centrepoint was a massive scandal and lawsuits, and a massive shock, a scar on the psyche of the social history of New Zealand. And you would think we would have learned more from that, but no, here we are 20 years later, and now Gloriavale is in the courts for all sorts of offenses, sexual abuse, slave labor, all sorts of violation, you name it, because there's an amazing volunteer organization that sprung up a few years ago called the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust. And they are actually Christians from a Baptist church further sort of 4 hours down the road on the other side of the South Island, New Zealand, and they're helping them. And they've actually built a really great cult-informed organization that helps with the transition work, helps leavers who come out, because families come out often in the middle of the night, and they are like refugees from another country. They really do not know how the world out here works. Yes, they speak the same language. Yes, they might have the similar skin color, and they can go to the op shop and buy new clothes. But apart from that, they really do not know how to fit in, and they go through so much trauma, and there had actually been nothing for them for so many years. So oh yeah, so only when I met Virginia Courage I think something really landed for me emotionally, because I'm a mother myself. I've given birth, and to hear from her that, telling me that one of the women she knows, a friend of hers, was basically expected to be sexually available for her husband hours after giving birth. And I mean, we're talking, women who've already given birth to children like 10 times, and their bodies are wrecked. There is so much suicidal ideation there. There is depression that all goes untreated because, of course, mental health problems are seen as a lack of faith. So you would never get to see a therapist or a mental health worker or so. So it was a game changer for me, actually. And then the overall, the arch, the link, you could think at first, oh, what are these three random cults doing in one book? The former sex cult and the Tantra yoga cult, they're in Thailand on the island, and now the Christian fundamentalists on the West Coast in New Zealand. But what really binds them all together is that they are sex cults. If we even want to use that term, I think more correctly, sex abuse cults, because of their over-sexualized culture, even though they all look very different in these different places, right? Each cult sort of had their own dogma, what it should look like. But as you probably know, sexuality is one of these things that's always controlled in cults. Maybe not in MLMs. I don't really know much about how that plays out. But apart from multi-level marketing, every cult has, in some way, shape, or form, either suppresses or amplifies or distorts their member sexualities. And that's definitely the case in Gloriavel as well. And so I've been trying to highlight that and say, hey, it's not just, that cult that puts on these concerts and they wear these blue frocks and they all look weird and we think they're cute and they have these funny names. And no, this is a serious human rights problem. This is a feminist issue. It's a humanitarian issue.
I think a link is also the subjugation of women and children. And I don't know if it's because I am a woman that when it's present in a destructive group, I really see it more than perhaps other elements and moving parts of certain groups. But you can see a pattern of the subjugation of women under the guise of pushing therapy boundaries or personal development or for your relationship to God, whatever the justification is for women to be abused and subjugated by those in positions of power. You can't not see the similarities. And I always say that it doesn't matter what the group's rhetoric is, what the group's beliefs or teachings are. If you were to just take the identifying markers of all of these groups and list them on a piece of paper, we could probably sit here all day between the two of us, Anke, and go, oh, maybe it's Scientology. Oh, actually, maybe
Exactly.
it's the Jehovah's Witnesses. And you go around and around and around. And of course, I understand that that's how frameworks are able to exist by the leading cult experts in the world. If we didn't have these earmarks and similarities between destructive groups, we wouldn't have these frameworks that survivors can apply to their experiences and say, oh my goodness, wow, I was in a cult. But it's almost laughable when some groups say, oh, well, we're not like them because we believe in God, or, oh, well, we're not like them because we're anti-religion, but we're pro-therapy.
It's never about the content, right? It doesn't actually matter. You could do the most, the craziest stuff. And I've been through some courses where I do some pretty extreme stuff. It's not about how extreme something is, even though, if you already do some pretty mind-bending things, it probably is then also easier to be manipulated and believe in, that your leader is God and whatnot. But it's actually not about the teachings. I mean, one example, for instance, I've done some great silent meditation retreats, right? And then I've also heard about some where they're very dogmatic and they tell you not to take your drugs if you're bipolar, and people go into psychosis, and they, only show you the video of this one guru every night that you listen to. So even something as innocuous as meditation can become very controlling and break people down in a certain way. But it's not because meditation itself is dangerous. I mean, at least the Agama yoga was not problematic because they did yoga. Yeah. Then again, of course, you could also argue, yeah, but the yoga culture in itself and the guru culture and so on, how much of that also supports a certain thinking that then makes you hand your own power over, and you don't question the leader and you don't speak up because you don't want to attract, be seen as a negative person. So sure, certain philosophies and religions, I would say it's probably across the board that in most, all the religious cults I've come across or I've heard about or I've researched, there's always the line of, it's that you're a better person if you can forgive, the perpetrator, or that your spiritual growth is bigger if you don't, speak up. There's always that spiritual bypassing element that some are better for you or for the world or for you. You show more faith if you're not a victim, if you don't have a problem. So it's kind of baked in the philosophy as well, but it's not about the content, right? It's always about the power structures and the dynamics and who's at top and, the groupthink and all of that.
Well, I absolutely loved reading Cult Trip. There are parts that are difficult and dark. There are parts that are funny and uplifting. I particularly liked reading about you and Frank going on your travels together. That was really nice. And there are also parts that allow us to see the direct links between destructive groups throughout different stages of history and also different parts of the world, cultures and contexts and influences, but also really at the end of it, all looking exactly the same. I feel so connected to your work through my own personal experiences of interviewing survivors. I feel as though it's similar. I've just never visited these places in person. And I wonder if you have any plans going forward to look into any more groups, or if you get open invitations or requests to do certain things, or if you just hear little stories and nuggets of things where you think, that's something that I am interested in looking into.
To be honest, I am not doing any more cult investigations. Definitely not for now. I feel I've done enough. It's incredibly hard, especially as a freelancer, to get these things over the line. It takes so much energy, and legally you're on thin ice. And I feel I've put everything in the book, but at the same time, I'm doing a lot of stuff in the background. So I probably get emails on a weekly basis of people who want to talk to me about a cult experience or they have questions. So I'm a big networker. So I started a Facebook group called Culty Conversations NZ. It's not just for New Zealanders, but it's sort of the beginning of, it's a platform for people to bring things to light and talk about them and just to raise cult awareness. I'm also connected with activists around the world, with other journalists. So I'm often liaised between activists, survivors, and media outlets who are keen to run a story. And I think, okay, let them do it. I know the story. I know what the story is. I'm enough of a journalist to see what the story is. And I know the content. I get what the sort of juice of the story is, but I don't necessarily need to write it all and research it all and get it legalized and then deal with the backlash. Let someone else do that. So I pass that on. And I've started running workshops. They're called How Not to Start a Cult. So, and I'm actually taking them around the world as well. One to Thailand, Koh Phangan. I'm going to Byron Bay this year as well. And I've just done these workshops here at some summer festivals, some hippie festivals in New Zealand and here in Christchurch. And basically, educating people about what are the red flags? What makes a cult? How do we spot these things? How can we nip them in the bud? And especially speaking to people who are facilitators or participants in self-development and yoga workshops and tantra workshops. So really, not just people who want to hear horrific things about cults, because they often forget cults, we always speak about the sinister cults. Well, they don't feel sinister when you first step into them. They always feel great. They always feel good, right? They always look amazing and you learn amazing things. And so just to bust these myths also of what makes typical cult followers. So that's a bit of my, these are my key messages that I try to put out wherever I can. So I'm doing more of this sort of organization building, platform building, media liaison work, and I love it. I think, yeah, I want to use the momentum that I've created with the book and just take it a little bit further. And of course, I'll be at some point, I'm sure I will be writing about cults again, but not really don't want to go near anything again as much as I did for the book. I think I've done my hard yards. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to bring How Not to Start a Cult over to the UK?
Just invite me and I come.
That would be awesome, because I listened to your chat with Stephen Mather from Cult Hackers, and he's over here. And there's quite a few of us content creators that would absolutely love the chance to go to a workshop titled How Not to Start a Cult. And it
Oh, I mean, it's a little bit tongue in cheek. It's actually a serious topic, but I promoted a little bit tongue in cheek, where I said, "Do you suffer from too much charisma? Are you worried that you're too fond of your tribe? Well, fear not, we've got you covered. Don't be a follower, don't be a guru." But yeah, so that the jokes around the cults, which are out there in the public sphere, that through that I can actually get people to see the deeper, more important side of it, which is actually important for everything. It's not just about cults. It's actually more learning about these coercive dynamics and how they appear, and that people in cults are no different from people anywhere else. And in fact, I think they're often really great people. Personally, I really believe it's some of the best human qualities that bring people into cults. So I'm always I always find I have a lot of respect, especially for those who've come out and can work through it all. So I'd be happy to be part of something. Yeah. Next year, 2024 in the UK. Let's make
2024.
it
I would
happen.
love that. We will make it happen. Who knows? Maybe Ixa will be back over here in the UK as well for because it's gotta come back around to the UK at some point. The last time you were all here in Manchester, I hadn't even started this podcast and didn't know anything about cults. So I have to believe that one day everyone will come back over to the UK. I was looking at the lineup for this year's conference, and 80% of people speaking have been on the podcast. So it would be so amazing for me to be there in person and be like, oh my goodness, all these people here in person, networking, learning about cults, and just spreading that education and
Oh,
that prevention.
you could do a live episode from the conference. Wouldn't that be amazing? You could just go around with a microphone and capture it all. And
Oh, that would be so good. Here comes the journalist in you, like, oh yeah,
of course.
you need to turn that into an opportunity. And my brain is always doing the same thing. So that kind of rounds up our conversation today. I wondered if you could just let everybody know where they can find copies of your amazing book, Cult Trip, that has the best cover art, that also reminds me of The Handmaid's Tale. When you look at it, I get those vibes.
It's amazing that you say Handmaid's Tale, because it's for New Zealanders, it says Gloria about, but since you don't know the costumes, that's actually perfect, because the overall optic looks like the cover, Handmaid's Tale. Clever. It's actually, I think she's an award-winning designer, that one who designed it for HarperCollins. So if you can't find the book in your good local bookshop, which would always be my first suggestion, support your local bookshop or your library, it's fine, of course, any, Amazon, it's on Kindle, it's Mighty Ape, wherever you buy your books. Unfortunately, Book Depository has closed down, but yeah, it's a book that's widely available. I saw people, friends in London sent me photos that it's, from the big bookshops there in Soho and Piccadilly Square, and it was there on the shelf. So you should be able to find it. Cult Trip. Yeah, go and find your Cult Trip.
Awesome. That's so good. And I am so thankful that I got a copy, and I've added it to my growing collection of some of the best books in the world, written by some of the best people that then come to chat with me, which makes it even better. So thank you so much for your time today, Anke. Thank you for writing such an incredible book, for sharing it with the world, despite almost writing a book and then not writing it, and then kind of writing it and allowing us to see what went into that process. It's been amazing to be part of the post launch story of Cult Trip, and I'm really looking forward to bringing this conversation to the listeners. So thank you so much, and I hope that you go and get a really good night's sleep.
Yeah, it's getting late here. I wanted to thank you, not just for reading it, for having me on the show, but also for understanding it so well. I think I have not yet done an interview with someone who, who had such detailed questions. I really felt you went into all the nooks and crannies, and it's actually amazing getting feedback from people who understand the cultiverse, not just your average reader, but because I was always a bit worried that the ones who are the experts, which I'm not, that this wouldn't be their kind of book. So it really means a lot. Thank you, Casey. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for having me here.
Take care. Bye, bye, bye. That is the end of this mini-series with author and journalist Anke Richter talking about her book, Cult Trip. To find a copy of the book, and to find out more about Anke's work, you can follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.